We are going live in a second. Owen, could you just check that we're live?
Yep, Richard, I can confirm we're now live on YouTube.
Right, welcome to this online meeting of the Local Plan Committee. Our first item of business tonight is the election of chairman. Do I have any nominations, please? Councillor Coleman?
Can I nominate Councillor Nick Barlow?
Is that seconded? Seconded by Councillor Scordis. Do I have any other nominations? No, we'll proceed to the vote then. I shall read out your names in order, and could you please indicate your vote either for, against or abstention for the election of Councillor Barlow as chairman. Councillor Barber?
Abstain.
Councillor Barlow?
For.
Councillor Bourne?
For.
Councillor Coleman?
For.
Councillor Ellis?
For.
Councillor Hayter?
For.
Councillor Moore?
Abstain.
Councillor Gerard Oxford?
For.
And Councillor Scordis?
For.
So that's 7-4 with 2 abstentions. Councillor Barlow is duly elected as chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Sorry, let me get the right thing up on screen. Okay, so the next item, and thank you to the committee for re-electing me to this position. Next item, item 2, is election of deputy chair. Can I just ask, do we have any nominations for that? Nominations for deputy chair? Anyone?
I'd like to nominate, sorry, I couldn't unmute my microphone.
That's like,
Nominate Councillor Scordis.
I get Councillor Scordis nominated. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Coleman seconded that. Are there any other nominations for deputy chair? No. Okay, we'll proceed to the vote on that. If Richard Clifford, Mr. Clifford, if you could administer the vote for that, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I'll read out the names by order, and if you indicate you vote for, against or abstention. Councillor Barber?
Abstain.
Councillor Barlow?
For.
Councillor Bourne?
For.
Sorry, Richard, I don't know if it's just me, but it's very echoey.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if someone's got their microphones on while not speaking, perhaps. Might be why. Now you're muted, Richard.
We'll try again now.
That's better.
Councillor Bourne?
For.
Councillor Coleman?
For.
Councillor Ellis?
Abstain.
Councillor Hayter?
Abstain.
Councillor Moore?
Abstain.
Councillor G. Oxford?
For.
And Councillor Scordis?
For.
So the voting was 5, 4 and 4 abstentions. So that's duly carried.
Thank you very much, Richard, and congratulations to Lee, who doesn't actually have to sit alongside me for this year. So I'm sure he's happy about that. Anyway, item 3, welcome and announcements. Hello and welcome to this online meeting of the Local Plan Committee on Tuesday the 14th of July. I'm Councillor Nick Barlow, I'm Councillor for Castle Ward, and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. This meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will be available to watch afterwards. To begin, I've got a few matters of housekeeping. It's slightly simpler than before. There's no fire alerts or toilet announcements to make. With the exception of the Democratic Services officers advising us, would participants all please mute their microphones unless they're invited to speak? And I think we just had an illustration of why we need to do that. I will ask for each item of business to be presented, and then I'll ask each member of the panel in turn if they want to ask a question or comment. So you'll all get your chance to speak after that. I'll have a list and make sure I sort of go through you all there. If I don't, please do wave vigorously to remind me I've missed someone. At the end of each item of business, the Democratic Services Officer will ask each panel member in turn to confirm audibly how they wish to vote, and that will be on each of the 3 items that we have a vote on. If we're still going at 8 o'clock, we may have a short break then, just a short comfort break for everyone, depending on how much longer business we have to go with. I will in a moment just ask each panel member to introduce ourselves. I just wanted to add one little thing to the announcements, which is, and I hope the rest of the committee will agree with in this, as just a quick notice of thanks to Amanda Chidgey, who was the Democratic Services Officer who served this committee for several years and has recently retired from the council. And I just, we didn't have a chance between the last meeting we had and this meeting and her retirement being announced. We haven't had a meeting since then, so she has now retired, but I would like to I think on behalf of the committee to thank her for her service and as chair for her assistance to me over the last year. And I know previous inhabitants of this role will probably thank her as well. So if I could then move on and ask the members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Barber.
Good evening, my name is Lewis Barber and I represent Lexington and Braeswick. That was a very weird intro. My name is Councillor Barber and I represent Lexington and Braeswick.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
Good evening, Councillor Tina Bourne, representing Greenstead Ward.
Councillor Coleman.
Good evening, Councillor Phil Coleman, representing Marlene Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
If I can unmute. Good evening, Councillor Andrew Ellis, representing Markstay and Layer Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
Good evening, Councillor Chris Hayter, St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Good evening, Councillor Pat Moore, representing Mersey and Pyfleet Ward.
Councillor Oxford.
Councillor Jared Oxford, Highwoods Ward.
And Councillor Scordis.
Lee Scordis, Deputy Chair and Old Heath Hive and Rowhedge.
Thank you very much. So I have to flip to another screen just to check the details on that. Oh, and sorry, the officers as well. So need to work. There are some other councillors here. They'll be introduced later because they're speaking on the Have Your Say section. They're not members of the committee. For those of you seeing it on screen, we'll introduce them then. But to move through the officers, starting, I'll go with the order I've got them on my screen. Mr. Vipond.
Good evening, Chair. It's Ian Vipond, Strategic Director, Policy and Place.
Karen Sirets.
Good evening, Karen Siret, Lead Officer for Planning, Housing and Economic Growth.
Laura Chase.
Good evening, Laura Chase, Planning Policy Manager.
Thank you, Laura. So just checking through. Sandra Scott.
Good evening, Sandra Scott, Place Strategy Manager.
Thank you. And Democratic Services, do I need to introduce Democratic Services Officer?
Richard Clifford, Lead Democratic Services Officer. Thank you.
Okay. Owen Howell.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer.
Matthew Evans.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
And I did see, yeah, sorry, Andrew Weavers.
Hello, good evening, Andrew Weavers, Monitoring Officer.
Okay, I think that's covered everyone. Apologies to anyone I've missed out. I don't see anyone furiously waving or raising their hand to tell me I've missed them. So that's good. So we'll move on then to item 4, which is substitutions. I don't believe anyone here is substituting. We are the full committee for tonight.
That's right, Chairman. There are no substitutions.
Thank you. Item 5, urgent items. We have no urgent items scheduled for this meeting. Item 6, declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any declarations of interest to make for this meeting?
There's no indications, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you for that. So that's item 6. And item 7, which is the minutes of the meeting held on 27th of February 2020. First, does anybody have any problems or any errors in those minutes? I wasn't at this meeting, so I can't judge for any of the members who were present. If you have any. I don't see anyone there. So can I ask for someone who was present there to propose that we accept them, please? Councillor Scordis proposed that. So would we have to vote on accepting the minutes, Richard? Sorry on that.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just read the names again. Councillor Barber.
I was absent, so cannot comment.
Abstained. Councillor Barlow.
Abstain.
Councillor Bourne.
Agreed.
Councillor Coleman.
Absent from the last meeting, so abstain.
Councillor Ellis.
Agreed.
Councillor Hayter.
I wasn't present, so I'll abstain.
Councillor Moore.
Agreed.
Councillor G. Oxford.
Agreed.
And Councillor Scordis.
Yeah, agreed.
That's 5-4, 4 abstentions. That's carried, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, so now we move on to item 8, which is the general have your say. This is obviously being conducted slightly differently now we're online. I will announce speakers by name in turn, who'll each be allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes. We'll also have some written representations, which I'll invite the Democratic Services Officer to read to the meeting. Then any visiting councillors will be invited to speak for up to 5 minutes each. The Democratic Services Officer will ring a bell when there is a minute remaining, and again when the time has elapsed, and speakers will be required to stop at this point. Once all representations have been made, I will ask all the visiting speakers to leave the meeting. The remainder of the meeting will be available to view on the Council's YouTube channel. We will obviously respond to the points from the different have your says made as a group at the end of them, I believe. So just to confirm, we have in person Councillor Glyn Evans from Wivenhoe Town Council. We have 3 written submissions from the Democratic Services Officer will be reading from Sir Bob Russell, Councillor Anthony Ellis from Langham Parish Council, and Jane Black from the Wivenhoe Society. And visiting councillors, we have Councillor Luxford Vaughan, Councillor Dundas, Councillor Julie Young, and Councillor Corey. So no one's again seems to be telling me I've missed anyone out. So Councillor Glyn Evans from Wivenhoe Town Council. If you will have 3 minutes when you're ready to start, and as I said, a bell will sound when you have a minute left. And welcome. Well, this meeting.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Let me know when you want me to start.
Sorry, please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you. One of the universal laws that endured in my 35 years as a professional financial advisor was that investing in long-term projects with little or no return projected for several years, when there is no cash buffer, is risky to the point of being foolish. There are several other pertinent risks at play with the garden city proposals for which there are dire precedents. In this modern technological age where the pace of change is quick and unpredictable, technology itself is quickly outmoded. Business, and to a great extent society, needs to be light on its feet in adjusting to change. Investing large amounts up front in a project which is projected to complete after more than 1 decade has historically resulted in almost universal failure. In the space of just 13 years, for example, Ireland's entire economy went from boom to prolapse. Garden cities may be a smaller concern, but are no less speculative. The acid test of any project is whether a private investor would stake their hard-earned cash. The professional investor would consider the business plan, the previous track record, and the credentials of the directors. Then perhaps the assets or cash that back the investment. So taken in turn, firstly, the business plan had to undertake a major overhaul to meet the approval of Inspector Clues, whose pronouncement of viability is yet still based on several funding assumptions and aspirational land purchase values, many of which have yet to be substantiated. Then, there is no risk of previous track record of such a garden city in circumstances such as these. Third, the directors of NEGC do not or did not have relevant qualifications or experience to any level. It seems unlikely, therefore, that any of these would have been selected for the roles in the commercial arena based on this. Questions have been raised as to whether those who advise them are truly independent. Fifth, there are no assets. The cash, approximately 8 million that's been invested so far, has been spent, much of it on salaries. Not one penny has been invested in any assets. There is no entity, corporate or private, that shares any of the investment risk. It's borne entirely by the taxpayer. Lastly, we're experiencing the sharpest and deepest recession in living memory, from which we're unlikely to recover anytime soon. All investors run from uncertainty. Let's watch the markets. Lastly, NEGC's managing director, in front of several hundred people at the Barn Brasserie in Great Tay on 18th of January 2019, was recorded as saying that pension funds would be interested in investing in this project. Let me tell you, that raised an eyebrow from my point of view. Given the trustee's fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of its members, this is one acid test I would be very interested to see come to pass. The taxpayers who ultimately underwrite this project deserve to see that part of the investment prospectus, if any, that convinced the trustees to invest on its merits. In the absence of this, it would seem that the only private entities involved in this project that will be net beneficiaries of whatever taxpayer-funded subsidies may yet support it. That's my bit. Any questions? Councillor Barlow, you're muted.
Apologies. Does any member of the committee wish to ask a question at this point? No, I'm not seeing anything there. Thank you for your comments. I'll ask the officers for some general comments on yours and the other submissions rather than breaking it up to go for each one. So there will be some other submissions read out now, and after that I will ask the officers for some comments and responses to those. So we've now got the 3 submissions to be read out that have been submitted by members of the public. I'm not sure which officer is performing those.
I'll be reading those out, Chairman.
Okay, so over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. So the first one is from Councillor Anthony Ellis of Langham Parish Council, and it's a series of questions. 1, what planning legislation and regulations have been applied to application number 191830, those based on the adopted local plan or the emerging local plan? 2, under what legislation was the decision made to recommend approval of application 191830 at an in-camera meeting of selected councillors and officers last March? 3, paragraph 58 of the planning inspector's letter supports the parish council's position on wastewater infrastructure, which it has reiterated to Colchester Borough Council over the last 3 years. What steps will Colchester Borough Council now take to address this issue? Extracts from the letter are set out as follows. There are 2 extracts. Paragraph 51, I consider that it is reasonable for EB/083 to conclude that the main modifications to plan policies SB5, SB7, SB8, SB9 and SB10 requiring adequate wastewater treatment capacity to be provided before dwellings are occupied will ensure that no adverse impact on any European site will occur as a result of changes in water quality. And paragraphs 151 to 156. There are statutory responsibilities on the water supply companies, Anglia Water and Affinity Water, to plan to meet future growth in demand, and on Anglian Water to provide wastewater treatment capacity. Allocations are made in the NEA's viability assessment to fund connecting infrastructure at each of the proposed garden communities. However, those allocations are inevitably subject to a degree of uncertainty, given that specific solutions have yet to be identified. I consider the consequences of this in a section on viability below. The next contribution is from Jane Black of the Wivenhoe Society, as follows. 1. The wording on medical facilities in policy SP8 amendment NM35 has been changed from the original draft. Instead of committing to new on-site primary healthcare provision, it now states that extra capacity could be provided by improvement, reconfiguration, extension, or relocation of existing medical facilities. What are the implications of this in practice? Does this mean that Greenstead or Wivenhoe might lose their existing GP surgeries, which would be to the severe detriment of those communities? Does it mean that residents of the garden community might have to travel to Greenstead or Wivenhoe? Either alternative would mean increased car journeys and congestion. Not providing on-site medical provision does not seem consistent with the garden community principles, and relocating existing facilities would have severe consequences for existing communities. Broad location map 10.2, reference SB7 MM18. A note at the end states this will be added and based on the map provided for the hearings, document EXD 080A. The map in this document has some text stating that the broad area of search includes areas which will act as landscape buffers between the garden community and surrounding settlements to provide adequate separation and to ensure the identity of the existing communities are maintained. This text needs to be included either as part of map 10.2 or within the text of the policy where the map is referenced. 3. Gypsies and traveller provision SP7 MM18. There is no statement of the hectares required. It may be difficult to fit in all the housing provided given all the constraints. Local authorities have an obligation to provide for gypsies and travellers, and there is a shortage of sites, but no explanation is given as to why provision should be tied to the garden community. Will the garden community pitches be equally assigned to meeting Colchester and Tendring's needs? 4. Rapid Transit Route 1, SB5 MM11. No route on the ground has yet been defined. Could the council ensure that there is adequate further consultation and that in deciding on alternatives, the disruption costs from construction is one of the factors taken into account when deciding on a route? And the final submission is from Sir Bob Russell, entitled East of Colchester New Community. With Highwoods Country Park, Cymbeline Meadows and Gosbecks, Colchester Borough Council has shown to central government how local councils can provide new areas of public open space and parkland. And with these 3 examples, now provide urban Colchester with a public open space to the east of Greenstead and Longridge, creating a public open space eastwards for a minimum of 1.5 kilometres from Salary Brook to the western edge of the proposed new community near Elmstead Market. I would also argue the same for Middlewick in South Colchester, but that site, I am advised, is not on the agenda for this meeting, so I leave that for another time. Colchester Borough Council and Tendring District Council have previously, working in partnership, which is to be applauded, agreed that there should be no new development eastwards of Salary Brook, and the brook itself as the western boundary, up the eastern slopes and then eastwards for such a distance that none of the new dwellings in the new community would be visible from Greenstead and Longridge at any time during the seasonal changes of the year. Regrettably, the area to the northern end of the valley in the parish of Ardley, thus Tendring District, is currently being developed, a ludicrous decision by the Government Planning Inspector against refusal by Tendring District Council, a refusal backed by Colchester Borough Council, for this new development off Bromley Road. That ludicrous decision must not be allowed to be a precedent for the rest of the valley and its eastern slopes. Rather, a visible warning of how allowing more development in the valley and on the slopes would be a planning and environmental disaster to the disbenefit of residents of Greenstead and Longridge, and a visual ruination of the current open countryside when viewed from Clingo Hill. Opposition to development of Salary Brook Valley and the eastern slopes must include all land from the northern end, next to the new housing being built off Bromley Road, to the southern end, next to Clingo Hill. Previous suggestions for expansion by the University of Essex onto the Salary Brook northern side of Clingo Hill should be clearly made one of no development, with the fields here remaining undeveloped and included in the proposed Salary Brook Country Park. It does not make sense to have a university campus split by a dual carriageway, a dangerous, fast-moving road with a record of injury, accidents and fatalities. What I have laid out above is fully in accord with all that has been said by councils and members of the public over the past 5 years during the deliberations of the local plan. Specifically at the meeting of the local plan committee on 6th November 2017, it was agreed that the next consultation document would include wording to this effect, with no development on land eastwards for a distance of at least 1.5 kilometres. I trust the committee will confirm its previous intentions. And that concludes the written submissions, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. I'll just ask now for the officers, Mr. Fipond, Mr. Sarrett and any others, if they have any response. There's some technical issues, questions raised in there. I think we could just do with getting responded to now. Obviously, a lot of the substance and policy in there is stuff that will be coming up during items 9 and 10 on the agenda. But I think just to address those, the simple questions that we can answer now, just so we can get those out of the way and move on. And obviously, I'd like to thank all the members of the public who have taken the opportunity to have their say this evening. So,
thank you, Chair. If I start, perhaps if I start by saying that many of these questions relate to the form of development that may occur with the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community. Much of the specifics for that development will be brought forward in a development plan document, what's called a DPD, and any subsequent master plan that might be required by that document. So many of the issues that have been raised are not unimportant issues, but they are issues for another day as that work progresses. In terms of Councillor Evans' general statement on the long-term risks of development, I think all we can say is that a lot of that issue was considered in some depth by the local plan inspector, and he has decided that in his view the proposals for the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community do meet the viability test and therefore are able to be delivered, not just within the local plan period, but following the local plan period. And in a sense, that's the judgment that has been made by an independent inspector. And there's no point really going much further than that. Likewise, the comments regarding wastewater, while we recognise the issue and the inspector recognises the issue, he made it very clear that Anglia Water have a statutory duty to provide the necessary facilities to meet the requirements for dealing with waste water going forward. Again, I mean, that applies across the local plan and for all developments that the local plan envisages, but it particularly raises the issue in terms of garden communities and the need for that detail to be come forward again at the appropriate time. In terms of comments by Jane Black, I think we can again say that the broad location of the proposed garden community is in an area of search, and we'll have to again wait and see the details for the actual location come forward. I think there was a specific point about health facilities and the wording that the inspector has recommended, which allows potentially expansion of existing facilities or the relocation of facilities. And I think in the end that that wording is again the inspector's wording. Again, I would say that the details of the health facilities to meet just the population of the new garden community, but the existing surrounding populations would have to be assessed in the detail of the layouts and the proposals that come forward in the DPD. That's really where we have to address that issue. It has long been understood, and again, I think it is recognised in the wordings in section 1 that we do require timely provision of all infrastructure, including health facilities, and that will be built into the proposals for the garden community if committee tonight decides to proceed with that option. There are some wording associated with the map of the area of search, but again, I think that is a map that the inspector has asked for. He has just asked for the map. He is, in a sense, now in control of the wording on the local plan, section 1 itself. So that is what we have to deal with tonight in terms of his recommendations for potential modifications. Finally, in terms of the comments from Sir Bob Russell, he has indeed made those similar comments at several committees over the years, and I think we recognise his passion for protecting Salary Brook and the eastern slopes, and again, the specific location of any development and the test as to whether it's visible or not from Greenstead will have to be one that is advanced through the development plan document and any master plan that follows. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vipond. Karen Syrat, is there anything further to comment on?
I think Ian's covered everything other than in relation to Langham. There's reference made by Councillor Ellis to a planning application, and we are in correspondence with him and the parish council about that. So those points are being addressed outside of this meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now move on to the contributions from visiting councillors, and the first one to speak is Councillor Andrea Luxford-Vaughan.
Thank you, Chairman. I have 3 things I want to point out to the committee, and 3 I believe are incredibly good reasons why you should not be adopting this plan. The first is we have declared a climate emergency. I've sent to all of you the Transport for Homes report that says across the country they have concluded that they become car dependent. I don't know how we align any really serious commitment to a climate emergency, and yet we think that that is an okay way to develop. You know, it's the best farmland in the country. Although we state that 144 hectares of the 424 will be open space. Well, no one's confirmed, or I don't know, if that is going to be part of the country park for Salary Brook, which clearly is very important to all residents, or whether it's not. But equally, at the moment, you've got 424 hectares of open farmland that's producing food for this country. Now, you know, I'm not going to start banging on about Brexit, or the fact that we're, you know, in the middle of COVID and we've had serious problems with actually farming food and having food delivered to our supermarkets. But both of those things, you know, need to be borne in mind, that those weren't necessarily things we considered when initially we came up with the idea of concreting over so much farmland. We've also invested in a road, which I don't see has got anything to do with climate emergency, and a rapid transport system that is actually a bus. We know that it's a diesel bus because the costings don't cover anything better than that. This road and this bus are both going to feed into the congestion on the A133. We know that it's the worst traffic hotspot in Colchester. I don't buy the idea that the link road will save that, because the commuting patterns show that Tendring commute to Colchester work in the town centre. So it's not going to alleviate that. In fact, I actually have only found one person in support of this road, and he works for the university, so that's no surprise. Ringrose Jacobs have produced reports about predicted congestion. So I don't buy the idea that it's going to reduce air pollution. What they've suggested, and this was commissioned by ECC, so I'm unsure why ECC are claiming it will reduce air pollution, is that it's going to basically clog up the northern end of the A12, but also it's going to spread congestion to strange hotspots. I think Stanway was mentioned. Certainly Hythe will basically stop working as well. As for the bus and the rapid transport system, you know, we're committed to a modal shift, which I don't think we'll achieve. But if we really are going to try and make this a journey time less than a car, then we need to commit to some incredibly serious things now. And looking at the routes that were proposed, or the two routes that are now being pursued, you really do need to remove all on-street parking throughout the routes. Otherwise, the bus is going to just be in normal traffic. You need to increase parking charges in the town centre, because otherwise people are going to drive because it's more convenient, and actually at the moment is a lot cheaper than getting the bus. You need to hit businesses with private parking charges, because at the moment I know lots of people that see that as an added bonus, and that's why they work in the town centre as opposed to elsewhere. And we need to introduce a congestion charge, and I would suggest that that is the minimum that we need to do in order to try and get that bus working properly. The second one was covered by my colleague from Wivenhoe Town Council, which is viability. But I can't stress strongly enough that we wrote in our own reports, if we didn't own this land by, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, perhaps, I'm sure Councillor Ellis will correct me, perhaps not as far ago as that. If we didn't own the land, we shouldn't progress this project. Just because the inspector said the viability is strong does not mean that the landowner hasn't worked out that you can't use CPOs and he can charge you whatever he likes. You know, it's going to be, there's no competition. He can hold out to the highest bidder, and it's probably going to be a developer rather than us. The viability also didn't include paying interest on the land. So should we find by some miraculous miracle that someone is prepared to invest in this and lend us all the money, we won't be able to pay the interest on that. So I don't see any other option than this being guaranteed by the public, which I do not think they should be subjected to. We don't have a development corporation now. We don't have a plan B now that NEGC is going to be wound up. As I've said before, we can't use CPOs. And even if we could, we most certainly can't do them in the staggered model that is presented within the viability model. So, I mean, there are other things that are details rather than headlines, but they need to be mentioned. One is that the infrastructure investment has been slashed from the 2017 viability report by significant amounts. The contingencies are too low. The inspectors told us that. The RTS and Link Road is £10 million short, and that's before you put in the higher investment model, which he's asked us to do. There's undetailed off-site works that have got about, well, just a ridiculously small sum in, and I don't think that they've been calculated properly.
Chairman, that's your 5 minutes, sorry.
5 minutes? I haven't even started yet. Why didn't a bell go?
Did the bell?
It did.
It did. Sorry.
Right.
I didn't hear a bell, to be fair.
I didn't hear a bell. Can I have another?
I'll give you a short time to wrap up your points. No, don't bring anything new in. I'll give you a very short time to wrap it up.
Thank you, Chairman. Basically, all I wanted to say was on Ian's point about the DPT. If we're committed to garden community principles, which I'm hoping Councillor Mark Corey will go into more details on, then we as a set of councillors need to sign up to those now. It's not good enough to leave it to the DPD, because if I can see the fault in policy, then so can the developer, and they can go to the overarching policy, which is this, and completely undermine anything we do later. Either we're committed to garden community principles or we're not. And I ask you tonight that if you choose to adopt this plan, you would at least secure that in order to provide the development that you have promised the public.
Thank you, Councillor. Next councillor to speak is Paul Dundas.
Evening, thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors and officers. Yeah, I'll try and be reasonably brief. I mean, this has been a very, very long process. I know many groups and individuals have been involved. Obviously, I'm here ready to speak for the Conservative group because that's my role. I'm not ignoring the others, but they can speak for themselves. But they are, I haven't forgotten them. I'd also just like to mention, actually, at this stage, I know I haven't always agreed with them, but a lot of people have put an enormous amount of work into this, particularly our officers. And although I haven't always agreed with the decisions they're taken, I do admire their dedication and the fact that a lot of people have put their hearts and souls into this, and I do recognise that. You're probably expecting a bit of a told you so, and I don't like to disappoint. So I'll do a little bit of that, and I think some others will as well. I think it's sometimes important we do look back and see where things could have been done better. We're all conscious of the enormous amount of time and money spent, and it's only really got us to where quite a few people said we'd end up years ago. From my group's point of view, we said in full council 4 years ago, the only thing likely to work is tendering and abandon the others. We even put it to the vote, and I hope the councillors who voted against it then have a think about just how much money they would have saved if they voted with us. We said the original submission wouldn't work. We cautioned against resubmission and suggested caveats on the option we chose. They were ignored and voted down. We said last year, if you resubmit it, it will not succeed. And again, our arguments were dismissed. So before I just end the told you so section, it would perhaps at some point be nice to hear some recognition from those who have dismissed our arguments by simply saying, sorry, actually, you were right and I was wrong. But we do have to move forward. I think we can all be pleased the entire plan wasn't thrown out, because if it had been, we would be back at square one with a higher housing target. The inspector has not given subtle or nuanced options. He has clearly lost patience, and he's clearly lost patience with people who he thinks will not listen, and has given two very blunt options. Personally, I still have reservations about tendering borders. I genuinely think the transport is pie in the sky. I think it has no hope whatsoever of delivering anything even approaching the modal shift targets. A bus no faster than a current bus with some very vague plans to avoid traffic jams will not be appealing in my view. And as Councillor Luxford-Vaughan just said, with these principles, the central transport feature of this scheme being a new dual carriageway seems slightly odd. Time will tell who is right. I respect the inspector's decision. He's an independent planning inspector, and actually I do genuinely hope I'm wrong and he is right. The modifications are extensive, and I look forward to listening to the discussions on them and which options the committee goes for. And I'll just finish by saying I had the opportunity to sub on to this committee a few times, and I remember on a warm evening about a year ago in the Moot Hall, the Conservative councillors then laid out the reasons why we thought the plan as submitted would be wholly or substantially rejected. Those reasons came back almost verbatim in the inspector's report. It's actually quite a weird experience reading a report and seeing your own words and those of colleagues actually spoken, or in this case written, back to you. But that's what happened. I recognised some of the sentences. So the Conservative representatives on this committee have been proved right time and time again. They have proved they know what they're talking about, and actually they do it for free rather than some rather expensive consultants who perhaps weren't so accurate. So all I really ask is this evening when they speak, I ask that you do all at least listen to them and give them the service of admitting in the back of your minds, or the thought in the back of your minds, that hang on, look, these people were right last time, maybe they're right again. So let's try and make a decision tonight, and most of all, actually, let's try for you as a committee and us as a council to actually try and move forward with a bit of unity together, because I think we will get a better result for the people of Colchester if we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. Councillor Julie Young.
Thank you, Chair. I firstly wanted to pay tribute to the continuing hard work of our planning officers, as Councillor Dundas has just done, who during the COVID period have continued to work so hard to keep planning matters progressing. The local plan examination has been going on long enough, members. The inspector has provided us with a way of taking things forward, and we should listen to what he's suggesting. Doing so will be the best way of getting an adopted local plan. There are a series of modifications, many suggested by officers during the hearing sessions. Now is not the time to be asking for changes, and I would urge caution with doing so. Let's accept what the inspector has proposed and move forward to consultation. That is the time to suggest changes if considered necessary. Let's not forget that we will be producing a DPD, a development plan document, which will add detail to the strategic policies in this plan. There are several references to garden community principles in the plan, which is what's important, and we can build on that as we develop the DPD. We probably all have thoughts about how the garden community might look, not least ensuring that infrastructure is provided in a timely manner. But that's not for this document. Let's establish the principles first. Matters such as the percentage of affordable houses, green buffers and a country park are matters we can all coalesce around. You have a set of recommendations before you, members, and I would urge you to accept them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Young. And finally, we have Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for the delay there. Good evening, committee. I've been to this committee a number of times over the years, so thank you again for letting me contribute. We are at the beginning of the end of this long process, and I want to thank the inspector for his work, persevering with us, for Karen, for Ian, for Sandra and Laura on the call today, those officers who have been around the table for so long, working really hard on this process. And also thanks to the politicians who've been involved, who've come and gone, but those on this committee I know have been there many years, who have put in the suggestions, have worked together on wording and ensured that we go forward in the best way possible. And even you, Lewis, for your contributions constructively opposing at times. But I think also there's thanks for the key members of public, for example, Jane Black and Sir Bob Russell, who were mentioned earlier, putting in those comments that they have over the years and putting in the studies, whether they're constructive in their opposition. That's obviously the best way forward, and we do try and listen as best as we can. It's a subjective subject, that is clear, and it hasn't been all plain sailing. I'm happy to admit that as leader of the council. But we must work together, we must ensure unity, and we must deliver a plan that is in line with the positives that we all can agree on within the garden community principles. For me, it's about providing a constructive challenge to ourselves to get those principles cemented into this plan, to be absolutely sure, to ensure officers, developers, and local partners going forward are all part of this stewardship which achieves garden community principles. So the next steps have to be right for all of us to go ahead. So I circulated a document to members today where I was outlining areas where I think we could dot the I's and cross the T's on the garden communities. It's 8 points in particular where I think there are needed improvement. And I do think it'll be very useful for the committee to recommend that these are looked at. In the report on page 130, it says that 4.2 minor modifications and consequential changes can be made in support of the text within the plan, and also in line with the ethos of the plan, which I have been through for a number of years, as I have said, many others around this table this evening. So it's about ensuring those garden community principles that we, as I say, most of us have really felt that that's the only positive way forward of doing development in this day and age when we are under the pressure of higher building targets. So I'll run through quickly those 8 points because I won't have very long to do so. The first one is the wording around the area of the garden community and giving geographical barriers. Each point I go through does have the page number included. This is page 95. And the submissions earlier from Jane Black and Bob Russell talked about this. Geographical barriers needed to define the area of the garden community at Tendring, Colchester Garden community. And to add in there specifics. So if you say that the A133 to the south, the country park to the west, and the A120 to the north are those boundaries, that would give robust wording to avoid coalescence in the future, which the inspector was keen to point out. And it ensures the garden community principles of not causing coalescence to existing communities, like mine of Wivenhoe. So the next point is about trigger points, and this again was brought up by others. Trigger points for schools. So we know in there it says school places. That's quite significant. We understand that, of course, in the early days of the community, people may go to schools that are already up and running and ready to achieve and take students. But actually, we want the infrastructure first. That's the principle of garden communities. So a trigger point in line with the ECC policy and the ACOM hearing evidence would be more tightening on the garden community principles that we would all like to see. The next point, trigger point about housing numbers to ensure modal shift. I am committed to modal shift and environmental upgrades and improvements in terms of our borough, and I would like to see that tightened within the policy. Furthermore, talking about transport, the RTS, which has been talked about already today, the rapid transport system, for that to be a success, more work needs to be done, but that could be taking a lot of people into town, but actually that has an effect upon the existing bus routes. So I wanted that to be understood by the inspector. Furthermore, removing of the point mentioned earlier by Jane Black to do with health services. Now I have spoken to the health service about this, and I'll declare my interest as a lay member of the board of the NHS CCG, but about ensuring that existing communities do not lose services due to relocation, and that it's all about infrastructure first, where we have trigger points that say there is a health centre going to be here, it won't be relocated from elsewhere.
Chairman, that's time. It's 5 minutes.
Well, luckily I circulated all of my points, and I'd just like to say thank you for listening, and hopefully you can take on board those recommendations this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. Slightly, and also I've had a request from Councillor King also to speak. Is there any objection to him being allowed to speak now as well in the visiting councillors?
It's at your discretion, Chairman, if you're happy.
I'll just check the wisdom from the committee. Yeah, so Councillor King, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. My apologies for not flagging my interest earlier. I must declare an interest. I am the council's representative on NEGC, but with just 2 years under my belt, much of the history that so many of you know so well it lies with you rather than myself. So my 2 years is as nothing, but in terms of local plan, but just an observation and 3 brief points, if I may, for the balance as you hear it. The observation is a very obvious one. It's been said already, which is there is very understandable praise for the inspector and for all that he's done and the depth of professionalism that he's shown in working through the huge complexities. And I'll just say what must be plain, which is if that's right for 2 parts of the 3 in terms of garden communities, then I respectfully suggest that we take his judgment for the 3rd. That is respectful in my view, although it's still a choice for the committee. My second point would be this, that there is, let's not forget it, and nobody spoke to it yet, whatever the difficulty that lies ahead, there is a huge prize and opportunity. We are not making up housing need. We've got year after year of seeing it, and year after year of seeing it met badly. And whatever the difficulty, garden community principles are one of the things on which I think nearly every one of the councillors here at different times has spoken of with sincerity and warmth. The challenge is to deliver it, that we understand, but here it is being embedded into our local plan. And so I just say that's a prize worth pursuing. Garden communities, an environment that will provide a quality of housing done well. And we must remember this, a time of challenge economically, a very significant inward investment and economic potential and advantage. And lastly, it's absolutely right to say again that not approving it means restarting the clock again with a likely higher housing target. That must be an uncertainty and a consequence that few of us would want to see, although I hear at least one recommendation for that. So that's it. My thanks to you as a committee for all you've done and for all you're going to do. And my recommendation is plain. Take what we have on the table. And my chair, thank you for your time and that of the committee.
Thank you, Councillor King. I'm done before your clock started chiming off as well at 7 o'clock. Thank you for that, the contribution of the councillors. I don't think there's anything there that we need a direct response to at the moment, because I think it can all come up in the presentation and discussion in items 9 and 10. So I will propose now that we move on to item 9. Sorry, I just need to get the other bit on my screen there, which is the local plan inspectors' conclusions and implications. And I would like to invite Ian Vipond to present to the committee on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Much of what I will say is set out in the report, but it is perhaps just worth highlighting where we are. As members have said already, we have several years in this process, and it is clear, I think, amongst other things, that government will be thinking about not just our case, but other cases where councils have spent so long in these processes, seeing what reforms might be needed going forward. Nevertheless, we were in front of the inspector for the second time in January of this year, and we have now received his post-hearing letter, which is Appendix 1 in the report. Perhaps if I very quickly summarised, it's fair to say, on the basis of the council's evidence in front of the inspector, that we got a fair degree of support on a number of key issues. We were judged, and of course there were 3 district authorities providing evidence, but together we were judged to have done sufficient to make the plan legally compliant. Stating the obvious is critical, otherwise it just wouldn't be sound. A lot of work was done second time around, if I could call it that, around the sustainability appraisal, and subject to some issues relating to deliverability, which I'll come on to. He found the work was satisfactory, and he was satisfied with the SA. Likewise, on the habitat regulations and what's called RAMS approach, quite a bit of detailed evidence on those, but he was content that we had assessed those issues correctly and reached the right conclusions. Again, a few members have referred to housing numbers. He reconfirmed his original position on the housing numbers, which for Colchester Borough sets our annual requirement at 920. It is worth knowing in the letter he just makes a reference that he is aware that the 2018 household projections will come out, and indeed have come out, and he will just need to check whether he needs to consider those in any final conclusion he reaches. In broad terms, the range of delivery mechanisms, essentially planning is delivery blind, were considered, and he was content with what we were doing there. And the long-term potentials for various road links and general infrastructure, he was content with. And finally, on the employment calculations, which he raised as an issue in the first series of hearings, he was content with on the second round. Nevertheless, he did conclude that there were some significant issues that remained unconvincing, particularly on the RTS, the rapid transit system. In terms of route 3 and 4, he was less than satisfied that they were deliverable. On viability, which we've already started to comment on this evening, he re-emphasized some of his earlier conclusions, that he didn't feel that you could rely on a delivery rate in terms of housing delivered from garden communities of above 250. He sought to ensure there was a 40% optimism bias on a range of infrastructure, not all, but a range of infrastructure. He needed a minimum land value in order to satisfy himself that the developments could be brought forward, and he was not prepared to accept some work that was done by the councils on inflation-based projections for viability. In broad terms, he gave little weight to the promoters, including NEGC Limited, in terms of their evidence on viability. Hence, he concluded that, as the report sets out, that 2 of the garden communities, that on the Colchester Braintree borders and west of Braintree, were not likely to be delivered, either because of their viability analysis or the impact of the lack of provision of the RTS for the West Braintree proposal. Nevertheless, he came to a conclusion that the plan in terms of section 1 would be sound if those 2 garden communities were removed and the remaining garden community could be taken forward. That's the Colchester Tendring borders garden community. He has effectively given you and the other 2 district authorities 2 options that you can proceed to make the plan sound if you accept his modifications, or you can withdraw the plan and start again. And bottom line, that is the decision that you need to make tonight, and it is the decision that is being asked of Tendring and Braintree as well. The report does cover some alternative recommendations, but they are there purely, I think, to advise you the scope of things you can do outside, if you like, of the inspector's letter. We are not recommending them as officers, and I think they are therefore there to note. If you decide to accept his recommendation to proceed with modifications, then we need to formally notify him that that's the route we are going. We also have to do him a technical reply on a representation which was made regarding the Heathrow matter in regard to the impact of climate change, which we are currently preparing as we speak, and we will provide him with that if that's the route you decide. Again, the modifications are themselves subject to public consultation, and that's likely to occur over August through to October. Specific dates will depend on a number of factors. One of those is we just need to ensure that with the modifications, the plan still meets the SA requirements and the habitat regs requirements. So we will redo some work around those specific areas, and those in terms of the SA work will also be subject to public consultation, if that is the route committee decide to go with tonight. It is again clear, if that's the route you decide on, the officers will proceed with progressing section 2. Members will know that a lot of the detailed policies impacting the rest of the borough, and in fact the majority of actual allocations through the rest of the borough are contained in section 2, and we will seek to progress that as quickly as we can in the context, obviously, of tonight's decision. If the members tonight decide not to accept that option, but to withdraw the plan, then I think members are well aware that that means that we will effectively have to start a new local plan and consider what we need to put into that. I won't go through the concerns, but again, I think you know and you've been advised that we will have to hit, or are likely to have to hit, a housing number which is higher than the 920 per annum, which we currently have, if you like, on hold with this inspector. Finally, I think in response to some of the comments that were made by councillors, I just want to make it clear that these are the inspector's modifications. He is quite specifically not asking for comments. That's not what tonight is about. What he just needs to know is which option you're going to go with, his modifications or withdraw the plan. If you proceed with the modifications, they do go on consultation, and groups, individuals, whoever can make comments on those modifications. It's not on the rest of the plan, it's just on those modifications. The inspector considers those representations, not ourselves. So having considered those, he does have the option to reopen hearings if he feels he needs to hear more evidence. Otherwise, he has then to write his final letter, which at that stage confirms his position and potentially allows you to continue to adopt section 1. And we expect that now in autumn this year, if that's the route members choose to go down tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you for that, Ian. Right, so what I'd propose to do for the next bit is to go around each member of the committee, as we've done another committee meeting, and ask for any comments or questions, and for Ian Vipe and Karen Sarek to respond to those as we go. What I would like to, I've got one brief question I want to ask first, but then what I'd like to do is go to the group spokes first. So that would be Councillor Ellis, Councillor Scordis, and Councillor Oxford. I do see Councillor Bourne has her hand raised. Is that for an urgent matter, or was it just for making a general comment?
No, I wanted to know about the discussion. Could you just outline your plan for the next bit? Sorry, Chair, I'm not understanding. You're going to come round to ask us if we've got questions to ask of Ian Vipon, and then go into discussion, are we?
The aim was I was going to go around to each of you in turn for comments and/or questions.
Okay, fine.
As you see fit for what you want to do. I had one brief question I wanted to start with, but then I said after that my plan would be first to go to the group spokes and then to the other members of the committee, which I think we fit in. I think the first one was just to get some clarity on the we were talking about there. Obviously, Tendring and Braintree also have to have their say on this. I'm just interested to know is what's the timescale for them considering the inspector letter and making their decision on this, and assuming it then is approved and goes out to consultation, what sort of time frame are we looking for consultation and any sort of final submission to the inspector or the end of the consultation? Sorry.
So, Chair, my understanding is that the tendering and Braintree processes will have completed by the end of July. So they will have reached their conclusions by then. Assuming all 3 districts have chosen to proceed with the modifications, we just need to confirm that we have the SA re-evaluation work completed before we can proceed to consultation. My estimate as I sit here today is that will probably be mid-August before the consultation starts, running for 6 weeks through the rest of August and most of September, which will mean that we would be able to get those representations to the inspector and hopefully receive his final letter in autumn. I think it would be fair for me to say, which is I think the broad timeline that we have outlined. Is that okay, Joe?
Yes, thank you for that. Sorry, I was just quickly looking at something you finished just slightly before I was ready to do that. Because our next meeting of this committee is scheduled. We've got one scheduled in about 3 weeks' time. But I'm not sure that will still go ahead. But well, obviously, I'm just thinking in terms of when we may have any meetings coming up. But we can talk about that more either offline or later in the meeting. Anyway. Like I said, I'll start with the group spokes, but then I will move around every member of the committee and make sure everyone gets a chance to speak, make the comments, ask questions as they see fit. So start with Councillor Ellis.
Am I unmuted, Chairman? I think I am. Thank you, Chairman. Ian, I'd say that was quite a generous description of the letter to the North Essex authorities. If I'd taken that letter home to my parents, I think they'd see it as a could do better report, which unfortunately I got several of when I was at school. However, as my group leader has already said, my colleagues and I, together with a number of other organisations, have spent the last 4 years telling this administration that you were getting this wrong. Now the planning inspector has effectively told you exactly the same thing. He's asked you to remove 2 of the garden communities, which is 80% or a bit over 80% of the housing that you were proposing. Our views have been ignored. And even when paid lip service to, I think Councillor Corey has talked about it this evening, 2 years ago when we tried to agree a consensus way forward. In fact, we did agree a consensus. We had several red lines that we put into that, and they were subsequently erased quite neatly. I know Ian will disagree, but I'd say that the opacity in parts of this process has been dreadful, particularly around the company that was supposed to be putting these things together. There are a lot of lessons that we need to learn as a committee, I think. Not least that officers are human, exactly like us, and are therefore fallible. And with that in mind, I'll repeat exactly, I've said it with monotonous regularity, members need to work harder, I think, in their knowledge on this subject. It takes years and it can be incredibly tedious, but we have to have the ability to challenge. And I don't think probably we have challenged sufficiently. We've tried, but we haven't done a good enough job, which is why we're now in the position that we are. Decision tonight does appear quite straightforward on the face of it. The inspector's modifications to move forward, or we start the local plan process again. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I certainly haven't got any sort of appetite to start this process all over again. I've been doing this for years. I have to accept, despite misgivings, that the independent local plan inspector has made a ruling. He said that one of the garden communities can be found sound, and at the end of the day, I'm probably going to have to go with that. I know that if I don't do that, I'm looking at a higher housing allocation with growth faster than Colchester will be able to cope with. However, and it's quite a big however, this administration and our committee to a certain extent has spent the last few years making a series of promises to the public and indeed councillors. You've only got to see Councillor Harris's regular comments about garden communities to know that that has sunk in about garden community principles. So when I read the modifications, I'm not convinced, and I have the utmost respect for this inspector, but I'm not convinced that they actually sufficiently hardwire into policy garden community principles to make sure they're actually enshrined within policy. And it may be partially, as I was told in the briefing, it might be to do with the language. Increased provision of school places, I think needs to say new schools. New health facilities, which has been brought up this evening by 2 or 3 people. Yes, they should be created, but they certainly shouldn't be created at the expense of existing communities. We're trying to create a new community, and that shouldn't be to the detriment of existing communities. Now, this afternoon and this evening, the leader of the council has put forward some sensible amendments, I think, to the modifications. And I'll disagree with Ian, and we'll see where we go with this. But I'll disagree with Ian. And remember, I've said officers can be fallible. I think we need to put those to the inspector now. And he can tell us whether he thinks that he could incorporate those into his modifications before they go out to consultation. Or whether he'd prefer that we submitted them as a formal consultation response, which I'm also happy to do, but I'd like him to tell me which way he would like that. The leader's modifications are very similar to ones I'd propose. The point is, if we have to agree a garden community, and heaven help us, you know my thoughts on that, if we've got to agree to one to the east of Colchester, we must hardwire these garden community principles into policy. And that's going to safeguard existing communities, and that should safeguard the new community as well. Now, if that committee, if the committee will agree to that, I'm happy to propose it. I'm certainly happy to support that option. And it would be extraordinary, frankly, if this committee disagrees with, or if it's only the Conservative group that agrees with the leader of the council that this needs doing, frankly. Having attended the hearing, I have to say I'm confused. I know that a couple of people, Councillor Luxford Vaughan and Jane Black, and I think the leader have talked about the map that we have, and obviously Bob Russell, Sir Bob. And I'm surprised, having attended the hearing sessions, that the inspector didn't ask for a definitive map. He seemed to be leaning in that direction when I attended. This committee over several years, and I know some of you haven't been here, but even when Martin Goss was chairing it, we made a number of pledges, I think, around green buffers. Certainly, Sir Bob's submission regarding Salary Brook is something that we had previously agreed, as far as I'm concerned, and I think that ought to be hardwired into policy, and it's something that we should all wish to see. We've promised it, we need to do it. The boundary with no development south of the A133. That was also something that we have discussed. It's been promised by a number of people. I think Councillor Tim Young, when he was the portfolio holder, said that he would walk away from the local planner from NEGC if that happened. So it's something that needs hardwiring in. It's a commitment that we need to honour. And I'm just concerned, I know Ian Vipond has talked about the DPD, and hopefully Ian will be able to expand on just what can and can't be in the DPD. But my thoughts on this are, now is the time to do something regarding policy. Policy is going to overarch the DPD. The DPD is going to have to look back and up to policy. And if this community, and I've told you my thoughts on it, but if this community has any chance of succeeding in the way that you've envisaged, then we've got to get the policy right from the get-go. And if that means taking a week or 2 weeks or another meeting of this, an extra meeting of this local plan committee to debate that, to get that right, then so be it. It's taken us about I don't know, 6 years or so far. Certainly 4 years, 5 years. It's crazy. It's no secret I'm not a fan of this plan. And despite, as Paul said 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, us suggesting the way to go with East Colchester, which I rode back on actually because I was concerned about the rapid transit system, and then I had serious concerns when I saw what the Jacobs report said. I think Councillor Luxford Vaughan has brought that up. It will do to the A12 in North Colchester, which is basically clog it up, and the consequences for I haven't studied traffic modelling before. I know that Councillor Dundas did our submission to the examination and appeared on that day, but the consequences elsewhere in Colchester are actually quite dramatic. You'd be surprised that doing something in East Colchester is going to have an effect on Stanway, but that's exactly what it does say. I'm not sure that we, as an authority, are capable even of delivering this garden community, but hey, let's see where we go. There have been some submissions tonight about viability and about the business case and what have you. We know that I've read the Cabinet papers and we're going to be discussing it tomorrow, but any GC is probably going to be wound up, in which case we're going to be looking at a different delivery model and a different delivery vehicle and company. So all of that will be gone through. I'm not so concerned about that part of it, because I think if it doesn't work, we will discover it doesn't work and it won't happen. In the meantime, we're just looking at the principle of development. And at the end of the day, an independent inspector, and I have to respect him, has said that he believes that this could be developed. However, as I've said, I think that those modifications need to be better, and this needs to be hardwired into that policy to make sure that we start this on the right foot. So I will support going forward with the modifications if we will take this back, if this committee will agree that first of all we take back the leaders, they would have been very similar to mine anyway, the leaders' modifications to the inspector and say to him or ask him, will you accept these modifications and put them into yours that you will consult on, or would you rather we submitted it as a formal consultation response? In which case that's the way we will have to go. But I think we've got time. Ian Vipon's already told us it's the middle of August before we're going out to consultation anyway. I think the leader could speak to the leaders of the other two authorities and explain to them what we're doing and why we're doing, and the fact that if we're going to take this step, we have to hardwire these things in. I want to protect existing communities, and if we're going to do this new community, it has to work. I'll leave it there for now, Chairman, but you've understood on what grounds I will support this going forward. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, Councillor Ellis. Yeah, I have had a few discussions with the leader about these modifications, and to say I generally support them. I think the issue I've had discussion, I think you may have come up with a way to sort of square that circle, is how we actually best present them and adopt, if we adopt them, how we actually best present them to the inspector. But I think it's that thing of just asking him the question of how he'd like to take them. But Councillor Scordis, next.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, quite a lot to take on there. Just to respond to Councillor Ellis about being ignored, I don't think he was ignored, and I think that's the wrong word to say. I think the committee disagreed with you. It was as simple as that, and you were outvoted. We were listening, but we disagreed, and that's how politics goes. And I don't think it's helpful of the leader of the opposition to start his sentence like a smug schoolchild saying we were right, you were wrong, and then talk about unity. It's not really the way to go if he wants to work together on this. So I do suggest the leader of the opposition actually changes his tone when it comes to something that's important. Now, the fact is, and I think Ian laid it out, is that this isn't really open for comment. We either vote for this tonight to get this through, or we don't. And you can nod your head as much as you want, Councillor Ellis, but you just said about, oh, it's taken 6 years to get this far, but you want to delay it again. We're just going round in circles, that this process is going to be delayed and delayed. We need to get this section 1 through so we can get on to section 2 and have a local plan. Colchester is already facing speculative development, and once the economy grows again, we will face more and more. Areas like St John's will be up for grabs, areas like Marks Tale will be up for grabs, areas like Tiptree will be up for grabs. All these areas will be under threat. So we need to actually vote this through and get this through. We all apparently agree with garden community principles, which is why I feel, Chair, that we need to support the recommendations of the officers here. And as Ian said, it's not time for comments. We're having a public consultation where Councillor Corey is more than welcome to bring his comments forward there and have residents do the same. But if we delay this again, my feeling is we won't end up having that consultation in August. We'll be lucky to have it in December. We'll be delayed and delayed again. So my belief is if we want to protect Colchester from speculative development, if we want to have a local plan, we need to support the officers' recommendations here tonight and move forward. Oh, and one other fear as well, Chair, is about the HIF funding. If we delay this again, do we put the HIF funding at risk when the country is struggling economically? That could be cut at any time. So we do need to think about if we lose the HIF funding for that link road, which apparently only one person supports, but I've definitely met a lot more people who support that link road between Elmsford Market and Wivenhoe.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Scordis. I'm going to jump now. I'm going to go to Councillor Oxford as the other group spokes who's yet to speak here, and then I'll probably ask officers if they need to respond to any points made so far, but quickly before I go to the other councillors.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a happy bunny tonight. I've listened to some of the points that have been raised already, and to my mind, a lot of what I've heard tonight don't meet what I consider to be garden community principles. I've been a fan all the way through because of personal experience going the other way of having infrastructure first. And when I hear about trigger points, that's exactly what we've been having with Section 106 agreements, etc. And then you end up, and communities end up with virtually nothing, if anything at all. And my ward and others have suffered in the last 20 plus years for that very reason. And my whole idea of changing the way we deliver is to have the infrastructure actually operating first. And I don't believe this one is that this is what's being suggested tonight. Also, if I can say, I've said all along that the rapid transit one, in my view, won't work at all. It's going to get clogged up. The routes that I've seen, they will all get clogged up, and therefore it's not going to be rapid. It's going to be the snail transport system. I'm not content. I mean, to be honest, for 2 pins, I'd turn around and say, ditch this, start again. But, you know, I don't think there's an appetite within the panel for that. But that's where I'm leaning right now. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Oxford. I'll just ask quickly if there are any questions from those first few contributions that the officers need to respond to. Then I'll move to the other councillors, and that will start with Councillor Barber, just to be prepared.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be the first to recognise I'm maybe fallible. I'm not sure I recognise that the inspector is fallible. I think he received numerous representations on what I think we've coined tonight, hardwiring some of the garden community principles into the policies. And I think he has specifically chosen the wording he has chosen, recognising that that policy framework is provided by the local plan. And then the detailed wording comes with the DPD, and it's that balance that we have to get right. So the DPD as has been suggested, can't go against the local plan, but it can interpret those words that the inspector has used in a way which lays the next layer of policy into the garden community. So the issues, as I've said, about where buffer zones will be or where health facilities will be, at what's how they will be incorporated in any development, that's absolutely the territory for DPD. But as I say, I keep coming back to it. Sorry, I'll recognise what committee want to do or may want to do. But I say again, the inspector's not asking for comments at this stage. He has considered hardwiring. He thinks he's done what's required. He has actually gone quite a long way. I'm quite surprised in some ways that he has built into section 1 the reference to the garden communities charter, which I think actually lays the foundation for a lot of the things members are seeking. But he has, as I said, absolutely considered most of those representations that were in those eight points we have tonight. So if you look at something like modal shift and trigger points, that was absolutely before him already. And he's made a conscious decision that that's not where he wants to go in terms of section 1 policy. So I'll say my advice remains the same. I think he's looking for you to indicate whether you wish to proceed with his modifications. And I think those at the examination will know this is not an inspector who takes too kindly to be told where he may have got it wrong. So we are where we are. I will obviously, as all officers, we will do what committee decides, but that was my recommendation at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Karen Sirott, did you want to add anything from?
Thank you. I think Ian's probably summed up the principles that I was going to say about making modifications to modifications at this stage. What I would say is perhaps to try and reassure Councillor Oxford as much as anything that we are still looking for infrastructure to be delivered in a timely manner. And I think there's a lot of modifications there. There's a lot of pages and some text is crossed out and others is in bold, but there's plenty of references, for example, about schools and about schools being delivered, including in policy SP8, which sets out all the requirements for the Tendring Borders Garden community. And we will still be seeking that. There's examples of providing infrastructure up front, even on smaller developments. So we're still seeking that type of development. Don't think we're trying to water it down, or we will settle for some watered down version, because that is not the intention.
Okay, thank you for that, Karen. I'm going to go to the other councillors who haven't had a chance to speak yet. I'm going to do it in alphabetical order for this item. So we Councillor Barber, then Councillor Bourne, Councillor Coleman, Councillor Hayter, and then Councillor Moore. I will try and change it round in future items, just so you don't always get left to the last Councillor Moore. But Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, can I this evening begin by recognising the efforts of a range of community groups, parish and town councils, individuals in the borough and beyond, and councillors who, despite the onslaught against them, despite faceless corporations and consultants and the groaning machine of local government, they've been largely vindicated in what they've been arguing over the last few years. I also think it's important to recognise through the discussion this evening that there is probably much disappointment, anxiety and questions from the communities most impacted by the proposals in the east of the borough. A scheme that limps on, wounded but alive, it still fights to another day, and those communities, we cannot forget about them. It's important to recognise that they had concerns throughout the process, they raised valid points, and we should not forget all those points they made, and when voting this evening, recognise the fact that many of the issues they raised were valid too. The local plan process really, in my view, having come onto the committee back in 2017, has epitomised a damning verdict on the health of local democracy in this borough. Too often there's a view of the electors that put us in this position, that they're an inconvenience to be overcome. And that's really why we're here. We haven't listened, or well, the majority in this council have not listened to valid points raised by communities who know their communities best. And I think throughout this process, the one conclusion we can say is that all the people who were called NIMBYs, all the people who were merely dismissed for their contributions, they have been proved right. And we are now in a mess. No matter what the committee thinks, no matter how the administration may dress this up, this is a mess. Back on the 12th of June 2017, when a majority on the committee, when Councillor Goss chaired it, when that majority submitted the plan to the inspector, and I was not one of those councillors who voted for it, when that majority sent it to the inspector, they would never have said in 3 years' time, this outcome would have been what they wanted. A collapsed development company that's about to be wound up, a plan that has, as Councillor Ellis said, 80% of the housing removed from it, a plan that has seen millions of pounds spent when actually back in 2016, many of the arguments that were put forward have now been validated. That is not a success, no matter how much the administration may dress this up. And we warned back then. The reason why we're frustrated is because we warned about this repeatedly. Every committee meeting, we raised the points that Lord Kerslake raised, that other groups and specialists raised, that eventually the inspector raised. We first raised them back in 2016, or well, I'm maybe even earlier, but I first got elected in 2016. And I remember us raising them towards the end of the year after there was an open consultation when we had to put yellow squares on a map. It was shambolic. They didn't even fit. It was absolutely clear from that point on there were serious deficiencies in the process. And yet still, this council marched on, this administration marched on, ignoring valid concerns from, as I said, experts, Lord Kerslake, various groups and consultants, and eventually the inspector. Back in 2018, when we first got their letter, there was an opportunity to change path, to actually listen to those groups who had at that point been correct, to listen to those councillors, to listen and read the inspector's comments properly. But that wasn't done. I compromised back in 2018 to hope there was a way to do it differently. And to be honest, it wasn't different. There was no change in the approach to it. And the same rehashed arguments, I just heard Councillor Scorder saying there, we have to get a plan, we have to get a plan. That was the argument throughout the last few years that has got us into this shambles. We have speculative development because of the shambles of the local plan, because of the deep flaws that have been pointed out over the last few years, because of the delays, because of the repeated denial of reality. The theory that has been propagated at this committee over the last few years, the theories of garden communities, well, theory has finally met reality, and this is the reality. Speculative development, millions of pounds wasted, an administration in denial. It is absolutely extraordinary. This evening, we have an opportunity to shoot ourselves in the foot or bazooka our whole body. Neither of the two options presented are particularly ideal. One is clearly preferable to the other, which is to scrap the plan. I don't think that is an acceptable approach to take. But it's actually unconscionable that this administration fails to recognise the failings over the last few years, why people are so frustrated. And I don't really want to play a part in this. This is the administration's project, not mine. I never supported it. I raised my concerns over the last few years. They were really not listened to. And Councillor Scordis, to be fair, you would have had a valid point about politics and the difference in opinion and it being a majority democratic verdict. That's a legitimate point. If that majority democratic verdict didn't actually get it completely wrong and the minority were right after all. That is why we are frustrated, because we raised this so long ago, all of these points, and I really find that I can't believe, I read this paper, I listen to the tone of this administration, it hasn't changed. There is no recognition of why people are annoyed, the impact this has had on communities. There has been volunteers giving up their time in my community and beyond fighting this. That's what their elected representatives are meant to be there for, to listen. But they were all too often just dismissed as NIMBYs. And I just find that incredible. I mean, when I got first elected in 2016, I didn't think, I came in maybe slightly naive, but to be honest, it's worse than I thought, how certain parts of a council view those who put them in positions of responsibilities in public office. And we need to have a good look at ourselves, how we deal with our communities, because this is the epitome of how it goes wrong. And still this evening, there is a denial of that fact. I came into this fully prepared to compromise and move this plan forward. But to be honest, what I've listened to this evening has really made me quite angry. And for that reason, I'm not going to have any to be honest, I'm not going to have any part of supporting one of these options this evening. This wasn't my proposal. I've opposed it all along. This is on you. You take the responsibility for this administration. This is your project here in the borough. And I wish you all the success, because I'm not a psychopath. I don't want this to fail completely, if on the assumption that actually the proposals go through for the East Garland community. Obviously, I don't want it to fail. I'm not a lunatic. I want it to be a success, but I'm not going to have it on my conscience when it goes wrong that I played any part, particularly at the end, of letting this go through. I'm not going to have that on my conscience. So as Jeremy Corbyn once say, I'm present, but I'm not involved. This is your scheme. You own it for once. Take some responsibility. Too many times in this council, you just blame central government. Well, we all get given an allowance. Take responsibility for once. You voted for this over the last few years, and it's time to own it. I'm not going to support either of the options this evening. I'm going to abstain because I didn't want to be here. I made that point very clear over the last few years. And I'm not going to say I've told you so, because it's actually a tragic indictment of how this administration works. And really, the questions I want to say is, can this administration recognise that it no longer has a majority in this council? It lost it. I'm sorry for that, but you've lost it. So can you not just pay lip service to us, but actually get us involved in decision making? Because in 2018, when we did our best, we compromised on some of our principles to assist this council. We got nothing really in return. We were ignored. We said we wanted all the information. We never got it. Absolutely, I said I wanted to view it as a hawk, and nothing changed. And I'm sorry, but it's just not good enough. And that's why we're here. Millions of pounds later, developers lining up, taking advantage of loopholes in our planning system because of the delays to Section 1. And I'm not having any part of it. I'm sorry, but I can't support any of the proposals this evening in good conscience. You want to go through with this over the last few years, well, own it. I'm sorry about that, but I feel really strongly about this. Recognise the failings, have some humility, recognise the position this administration is in. They are the questions I want answered this evening, whether you will do that this evening. Say sorry. All people want to hear is say sorry. That goes a long way to repairing relations and going forward. Because I've spent years being belittled on this committee. Now, well, okay, 3. But 3 is enough to know that I do not want to be belittled any longer. And it's time for the people of this borough to finally be listened to, because actually they were right and this administration were wrong. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd stumbled in on a private therapy session there. Councillor Barber, I am sorry that you spent 3 years on local plan committee and don't feel that you're listened to. You talk about Councillor Barber talks about getting involved in decision making, yet takes a place on the local plan committee and refuses to play any part in any of the decisions from today, which I find rather bizarre. We have a lot of healing to do, Chair, in this council regarding garden communities, NEGC and local plan. However, local plan isn't just garden communities. There's an awful lot of work that has gone on with the local plan that is outside of any of the work from the garden communities. And I really feel that we've lost sight of that over the last 6 years. There's been amazing stuff done with neighbourhood plans, for example, There's been a huge amount of work done from all officers to support the local plan process. And yeah, the administration has to take responsibility and should take responsibility for garden communities. It has been this administration's policy for a long time to pursue garden communities, absolutely. And we should stand up as an administration and say that has been our policy. And we have to be responsible in responding to the inspector's letter. And the inspector's letter is very, very clear, and it's in the recommended decisions 2.1 to 2.5. That's what we're being asked to do. Now, we may want to berate the whole system. I mean, there's a lot of things I want to berate tonight that we were led down the path on, you know, and we have gone with other partners. We couldn't do this on our own as Colchester Borough Council. We've had to go in with other partners. So yeah, I'd like to have a rant about a whole load of things that I'm unhappy about developer-led planning, not people-led planning. I'd like to have a rant about democratic control. I want to see more people's panels, more citizens panels, more of that. I'd like to see more mutuals, more cooperatives. But I don't think that the local plan panel tonight is the place to have that. So, you know, all of us don't like stuff, but we shouldn't use this committee as a place to sound off. What we've heard tonight is some very clear advice from our lead officer, Ian Vipont, and Karen Syro. And it's in the recommended decisions, Chair. We need to facilitate the adoption of a local plan to further our borough. I'm and every single person on this panel, one thing we do agree on is we are concerned about housing targets, about housing delivery and the tenureship of that delivery. We want housing that is fit for purpose, 21st century housing, that's sustainable in their development. And we want houses that local people can move into and can grow their families, houses that come with jobs that boost the economy. All of this is central to how we feel. I don't think anyone on this panel would object to that. The inspector's letter was published weeks ago, Chair. Circulating a document on the day of the local plan committee today in the afternoon that the leader of the council has done, I think is unfair at best. Okay, we have had weeks to respond to that. So coming up with 8 proposals for things to put into recommendations for this local plan committee to agree is not good enough. We want to go out to the people now. It's the people's turn to decide how we move forward with the local plan. It's already going out to consultation. That's what the recommended decision is. Let this go out to consultation, and the people of Colchester, if they want to adopt any of those proposals that the leader of the council has suggested tonight, they can suggest those, and the leader of the council is perfectly entitled to put them in himself. What I don't feel he is entitled to do is to circulate a document that the people of Colchester have had no input into at all, that this panel may agree or not, and then we have to then go to the inspector when he has made it very clear on the 2 things that we need to do. And of those 2 things we need to do, it is not come up with 8 recommendations. Now, if we don't feel that the people of Colchester are not adult enough, sensible enough, or intelligent enough to come up with any of those points themselves, then we really are abdicating our responsibility. So no, I'm saying if anyone's going to propose those things, I'm not voting for them, because I want this to go to consultation. We have prevaricated now for too long. I want the council and people to decide where our houses can be built, what type of houses they are, and to move on to that we have to agree section 1. We need to go out to consultation. We need to let the democratic process take precedent. We should not be making policy or recommendations tonight based on sound bites or based on any kind of electoral advantage. That is a really poor way to make decisions that will be for future generations. And I'm shocked that I'm feeling in that way, because I don't want to feel that way. I want to think the best of people. I don't want to think the worst of people. Nobody wants to come onto the council and think the worst of people. So I would urge everyone to go for the recommended decisions 2.1 to 2.5, because that is what I'm going to be voting for later, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question and then a comment. Can I just clarify in Vipon that we cannot add Councillor Corey's points to what we send to the inspector? And I'm going to try and give you a positive example. By the way, Councillor Barber, I've never belittled you. If I ever wanted to say anything, I would say it to your face or in this committee. We need, and I'm still in favour of the principle of infrastructure-led development. We can't go back to the dreadful speculative developers dumping 100 here and 80 houses here and there that we've had in the past. We can't underestimate the need that our future children, grandchildren will need homes. And this is still the best principle, the best strategy. And I'll give you an example. Everybody probably voted against Chesterwell and Kingswood, the old Several site. Probably I voted against it as well. I didn't want that 2,330 homes built in North Colchester. But you know what? They're people's homes. They're great communities. They've got a primary school. They're getting a secondary school. They're getting a community centre, and they're getting the infrastructure. But it's been a fight. I would have preferred 2,330 houses to be built with infrastructure first. So I will be voting for this. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman. Councillor Hayter.
Yeah, again, as previous people have said, I think there's no doubt the officers have done a lot of work. There's a lot of time been spent on this. I really wouldn't want to start again on it. I'm certainly not an advocate of doing that. A lot's been covered already. Councillor Ellis has covered a lot in depth there. But yeah, personally, I really wouldn't want to see it all thrown out the window and that risk of starting again. That's all I've got to say on it at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hayter. And Councillor Moore.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't quite sure whether Councillor Ellis did put forward a proposal or not, and whether it needs seconding. If it was, then I would be prepared to second it.
He has put one forward, yeah. So
then I'm more than happy to second that proposal. I do, starting at the beginning, way back, every time I went to one of the meetings that was before I was on the local plan committee, but went to be told what it was all about, the various sections of it. Sorry, brain, I've been sitting here too long. With the consultants, with the boards up, and I always came away thinking, this is an aspiration built on a dream. It didn't feel to me as if it had foundations, and I'm quite pleased with myself. I'm sorry for everybody else. I'm quite pleased with myself that I was actually proved right, even though I'm not an expert in any of these things. That aside, I would like to congratulate the inspector. I was when I read his recommendations and modifications, what I noticed that he's actually injected plain language into it, which is always welcome, and I'm very glad for that. I certainly would like to see one or two things hardened up, that the garden community principles are absolutely hardwired into it. And I am worried that the plan that went with the recommendations, the plan at the end, was for an area which is not what I had been led to believe we were talking about. It expanded north over the 120 and south over the 133. And I think we need to be if we do nothing else, we need to make sure the plan that goes back is the plan that we first intended, and not where this plan has come from, I don't know, because I've always been led to believe that there would be no development below the 133. I was shocked to see that plan there. So I would certainly, which is why I want to go with Andrew's recommendation, because I think it's vital, because if we don't get that, the boundaries of it hardwired in as soon as possible, we're going to get creep. We know about creep. Developers will look at that plan and say, oh, look, and we'll go for that. And you'll have all the job of trying to argue them out of it and almost inevitably fail. So that is absolutely vital to get that one pinned down. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, I second Andrew's motion and hope that the committee will go with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. So everyone's had a chance to speak once now, so I've just got a couple of points I want to add at the end here, and then I'll ask the officers to respond briefly to any questions that were asked by members of the committee then, and then I'm going to suggest we take a break of about 5 or 10 minutes just to allow everyone to get a fresh cup of tea and do whatever else they need to do. I think we have to be clear on what we're sort of being asked to do and also what's within our power to do. And within the, we've got the recommendations, recommended decisions 2.1 to 2.5. We've had the set of proposed modifications from Councillor Corey. What I think we need to clear is that we as a committee, we're not actually making these modifications. The process now is in the hands of the inspector. As I used the description last week, he's marking his own homework, basically. He's made these modifications. Those modifications go out to consultation. He then decides based on that consultation whether he wants to make any further modifications before putting it forward, as I understand it. So the question, I think, is the modifications to the modifications that Councillor Corey has proposed is if this committee in general supports them, and B, how we then proceed to take them forward from that point. I think the one thing I had from Mr. Vipond earlier was that any consultation, because there's the other work that has to be done, isn't going to start till mid-August at the earliest, regardless of what happens with those. So, and isn't going to be completed to the end of October. We have one meeting down for this committee technically on the 3rd of August, but that's only 3 weeks away, and I think you've got that closeness because this meeting was delayed, and then another in October. And I think it may be worth us considering moving those meetings around so we have one later in August, early September, at which we can maybe discuss that sort of issue of how these modifications and any other ideas that come up from within the council then, and what we get from discussions with our partners in Braintree and Tendring, because I think as well that's a process. I think we have to remember is that this isn't solely Colchester Borough Council's process. We have Braintree, Tendring, Essex County Council involved in this as well. And so when we come to discussing modifications to the modifications that we would want, I think we have to consider that, how do we build that united front between us and our other partners to be able to put something forward. But like I said, I do generally support the idea of support the modifications Councillor Corey has put forward. I think the question is how best and how most effectively we can put them forward. So yeah, what I'd like to do now is just ask Ian Vipond and Karen Sarrett to respond quickly to any questions we had from that. And then we'll take a short break and I'll tell you the time, come back when they finished.
Thank you, Chair. And most of the commentary, I think, was statements about where individual members are. Councillor Coleman, I think, did ask the specific question about whether you can add Councillor Corey's points in return to the inspector. I think you can't. You have to tell him one option or the other. I think, as I say, he's not asking for comments. I think he will help authorities with queries. So I think, as I understood it, Councillor Ellis' question was more asking the inspector at what point to make those points. I imagine he will say, I don't know, but I imagine he will say during any consultation, which I think is your point, Councillor Barlow, that if you had a meeting in August at the start of the consultation, you could make those representations as part of the consultation at that point. As I say, I think most of the other points were probably just statements of individual councillors' perspective. Perhaps I would pick up on Councillor Moore's point about the plan. The plan is in the local plan. It's always been in the local plan as an area of search. In terms of what was submitted, we sort of had a hazed area around the area of search, really just to indicate it was just that it. I think what the inspector did ask for all the garden communities, and therefore lines were drawn, is a boundary of the area of search. Now, the area of search has to include, if you're going to have buffers, it has to include the buffers that you might wish to include. Otherwise, they're outside of the DPD, and therefore you can't impose any further policy to protect those areas if they fall outside of the DPD. The DPD can only deal with what's in that area of search. So it is important. I would strongly advise you to leave the map alone and then pick that up on the DPD. Otherwise, you're in danger of finding you can't give the very protection that a number of speakers have desired to see in terms of those outer areas outside of the actual urban part of the garden community. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ian. And Karen, is there any points you wish to raise before we... Taking that as a no. So what I'd like to suggest, and I think, so just thinking through some of the things we've got here, we do have that meeting in the diary for the 3rd of August. We haven't cancelled or postponed or anything on that one. I may just need to have a chat with officers offline in the break or whatever there, just to see where we are on that. But it may be worth us actually, depending on what else we have on the schedule to be on the agenda for that meeting at this point, I'm not sure what else there might be right now because I can't properly look, is whether or not we could actually maybe use that meeting to discuss these modifications as a starting point, but other ideas that we would want the council to support going into that consultation process. That would then ensure that we can have that sort of informal conversation with the inspector before then about when he wants to see things come forward from us, and also with our other partners before we go forward. But what I'm going to suggest now is that we take a break till just check the times right on my clock because that's sometimes wrong. 8:15.
There.
Yes, Councillor Vaughan.
Sorry, I did raise my hand, but rather late.
Sorry.
I don't understand why we're taking a break now before we've had the vote on this. We've got 2 other items tonight. This should be fairly straightforward. I don't understand why we are having a break now. Surely we should take the vote first.
Well, my thought is that we've got the proposal from Councillor Ellis. I'm not convinced that we've actually probably understood where we want to go with that proposal going forward, and if there is a compromise solution to take on that. And
I disagree, Chair. I think we should take the vote now, and I would propose that we take the vote now because it's not to say that those proposals can't go forward. They just should go forward with the consultation, with all the people's consultation points, rather than just a few people from this panel. That seems a much more democratic way of doing it. We don't lose anything. We're still having a consultation and people can put their consultation items in.
Okay. Right, we'll take the vote now then. We have 2. We have a proposal and we also have the recommendation. So, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just clarify the terms on which you want to put the proposal from Councillor Ellis. Is the proposal that we take advice from the planning inspector on how the suggested amendments put forward to the modifications that have been put forward be submitted into the process? Is that
Sorry,
cover
yeah.
what?
Councillor Ellis, could you confirm again what your proposal is on this one? I think.
I think I've unmuted, Chairman. Absolutely. I think that having read the Leader of the Council's policy modifications today, I know that Councillor Bourne thinks that they've come in very late, but they're very much along the lines of things I've been thinking of when I've been reading the documentation, and I thought it would be something we would bring to this meeting, not have to produce before the meeting. I felt that we should ask the inspector, as in I think these are things that should be consulted on, and I don't think Councillor Bourne, if you read them, can find any fault with any of them or take any issue with any of the things that have been put in there. Therefore, I thought it would be sensible that we ask the inspector whether he would wish to incorporate those at this stage into his modifications, which he will then go out to the public with. Remembering these are only what he sent us at the moment are his draft ones. We haven't formally requested the modifications yet. When we do, then this whole process starts. But at the end of the day, it would give him an opportunity to look at them and say, oh, actually, I do agree with that, or no, I don't agree with that. And he can come back to us. We can say either, would you like to put them into your modifications yourself now, in which case they can be consulted on with the public, which is what Councillor Bourne wants, and so would I. Or would you, having seen what we wish to say, or along the lines of what we wish to say, would you rather we submitted them as a formal consultation response? I asked whether we as an authority would submit a formal consultation response during the briefing, Chairman, and I was told by Mr. Vipond that no, the authorities had effectively made their bed and they would not be submitting a response. Other people could do that, community groups and individuals. I feel very strongly that this authority should be submitting a response. Our leader obviously thinks that we should be submitting a response, and therefore that's why I've made the proposal this evening. Thank you.
Okay, so
Yeah.
return. Yes, Councillor Vaughan.
On a point of order, for those people who are tuning in via YouTube, they don't have the advantage of having an email circulated at the 11th hour from the Leader of the Council with the 8 points of proposals on. Regardless of what they say, whether it says free lunches for all, I still wouldn't be voting for it this evening. Councillor Moore wasn't sure what she was seconding. Councillor Ellis hasn't even said what the 8 things are. And there are people listening at home that don't know what those proposals are because they're not in the order papers. And Councillor Corey, in his submission, didn't get to the end of them in his 5-minute piece. So in the point of transparency, the public who are listening don't know what those are.
Yeah, on a point of order, could I suggest that we may have the break, and in that time we get I'm assuming it's not a private email to the extent that it needs to be hidden away from the public, and we put it on the screen so the public can see it before any decision is made this evening. If Councillor Bourne's concern is people have not seen it, considering the decision makers are on this panel, we've all seen it. So for viewers at home, and I think it is a fair point, making sure that people do view what we're discussing, that's put in on the screen after a break, so people can view that documentation. I think that might be a fair compromise, perhaps, on that one. See, I'm feeling the compromise vibe there. So that's my suggestion to you, Chair, on that matter.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. Yeah, I think we'll go with that for now. I think, and if I can ask Mr. Clifford to put that up as soon as he can, and I will suggest that we now take the break and return at 8:20, and that's when we'll have the vote. So, meeting adjourned. I would just advise councillors to turn your cameras off while we're on break, Councillor Ellis.
Richard, if you're unaware, you can't actually read all of the points on that.
process, because it is a young team in the main, full of promise and full of potential for coaches, and that's something that Stuart Webber, the director of football, will be well aware of. And there have been departures. As the Norwich manager said, let's just try and provide a few. Okay, we'll just give it a moment, but welcome back to everyone. We'll get started in a couple of minutes when everyone is back and paying attention.
I'm scared to turn my camera off now, for fear it won't come back on as I've got it working. So I might just stay like this, if that's all right.
That's fine, Karen. You're lurking in the corner of my screen at the moment.
All right.
Okay, I can see most of the members of the committee. Councillor Ellis and Councillor Oxford, are you back with us?
Oh yes, Chair. Been here a while.
I see Councillor Ellis now as well. Okay, sorry, just checking everyone was there before we. Okay, so what I'm going to propose is two votes. First, on Councillor Ellis's, we'll take it as an amendment to the main proposal, which is that the modifications to the modifications proposed by Councillor Corey be sent to the inspector with a request to advise us whether he'll accept them now or if we should submit them in the main consultation process. And then following that, a second vote on recommending on, let me just find the details here, sorry, on items 2.1 to 2.5 of the committee report. 2.1 to note the findings of the planning inspector's letter, 2.2 to accept the inspector's suggested main modifications, 2.3 waiting for the other North Essex authorities to make a formal request for the main modifications, 2.4 note that public consultations will be undertaken, and 2.5 noting that an update to sustainability appraisal and habitat regulations assessment will need to be produced. So first of all, on Councillor Ellis's, yes, first of all, Richard, if you could take the vote on Councillor Ellis's proposal, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the vote on Councillor Ellis's recommendation. So I'll call your names and if you could vote for, against or abstain, please. Councillor Barber.
Abstain.
Councillor Barlow.
For.
Councillor Bourne.
Against, put it to the people.
Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Ellis.
For.
Councillor Hayter.
For.
Councillor Moore.
For.
Councillor Moore. For. Councillor Oxford.
Against.
And Councillor Scordis.
Against. We've given the inspector enough to do over the years.
Thank you. So that is 5 votes for, 3 against and 1 abstention. So the motion is carried. So we move on to the vote on the recommendations at 2.1 to 2.5 in the report. And again, I'll call for and against or abstention. Councillor Barber.
Abstain.
Councillor Barlow.
For.
Councillor Bourne.
For.
Councillor Coleman.
For.
Councillor Ellis.
With my proposal having passed, I'm assuming that will then go. We will be asking the inspector first, in which case I'll say for.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
For.
Councillor Moore.
For.
Councillor Oxford.
Against.
And Councillor Scordis.
For.
That's 7 votes for, none against and 2 abstentions, so that the recommendations are carried, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. So that
Chairman, Chair, can I ask just a point of procedure following that voting? I am assuming because of the second vote in favour of the recommendations, that should we receive a reply from the inspector on the first vote, the Councillor Ellis moved amendments, that he wants us to put them in during the consultation, that members are happy that we just move to consultation and deal with it at that stage.
Yes, that was within the proposal. So yeah, that's it. Shouldn't delay. This is the point. We're not intending to delay the consultation at any point. This is to put that in before and then for it to go ahead as planned, as you discussed at the timescale earlier.
Understand, Chair.
Okay, so that concludes. Let me just check my screen now. Item 9. Item 10 is Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community, the DPD, and I would like to ask Laura Chase to present this to the committee.
Okay. Right. Let's see. Can people hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, the committee is being asked to note this particular report on the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community. It's really just an update on our upcoming work program and the next stages of plan making for the garden community. The inspector's conclusion on the Tendring Colchester Garden Community is what we're taking as the basis for then going ahead and looking at the next steps we need to take on evidence-based gathering and master planning. So that's going to involve close working with Tendring District Council and Essex County Council and other stakeholders, and consultation at each stage plan making. It'll involve coordination of related and overlapping work on the Section 2 local plan examination, and work with stakeholders delivering supporting infrastructure. Hopefully it's appreciated after the discussion we've had is that the policies in it must follow on from the overall objectives set out in Section 1 of the local plan. As noted in the report, Section 1 policies require that the DPD will spell out how the new community will deliver on the garden community principles. So that's then translates into the modifications the inspector made, because I think they're about just, he felt satisfied that he'd provided the necessary level of hard wiring so that the DPD could then proceed on with more detail. And certainly we are anxious to get development of the DPD because it will give us a chance to actually go out and talk to people and to continue a discussion and talk about the all important levels of detail that will underpin delivery of the garden community. So the report just recaps that we had an initial round of consultation on development plan documents for what at the time were 3 garden communities. And we had the issues and options consultation from November 2017 to January 2018. And that was an initial sort of question asking stage. It was really just getting the ball rolling, and will then be followed by further rounds of formal consultation, and certainly more consultation in all forms within and without the formal plan making process, and discussions with the public and master planning. There were at that stage some initial plans and concepts developed by David Locke Associates and circulated at the time, but obviously we need to revisit those in light of the latest developments and what's happened since that time. A particular point to flag up is the award of 99 million from the Housing Infrastructure Fund to ECC for development of Link Road from the A120 to the A133 and for the rapid transit route from the garden community through Colchester and up to the park and ride in North Colchester. And I must apologize, there is a rather critical typo in paragraph 5.6 where it says K rather than M for millions. Apologies. Colchester and Tendring planners are working closely with ECC transport colleagues and consultants to ensure that the transport scheme designs being worked on for the HISKIT scheme fit in with garden community principles. So, so there was obviously an extensive amount of study work that went into the local plan, and that will inform and underpin the DPD. But given the DPD goes into more detail than section 1 of the local plan, obviously much more detailed work will be required to support the DPD. And the report provides a summary of further work required across a range of topic areas. For each area, the work required will be guided by the relevant government guidance and best practice. The report notes that by and large, further work will be carried out by specialist consultants for each area, with management and overall coordination by Colchester and Tendring officers. And a very key element of joint Colchester and Tendring work will be the development of a comprehensive program of consultation, including both formal consultation as part of the plan making process and wider opportunities to involve existing communities in master planning and infrastructure provision. So that's just a brief summary. So obviously I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Laura. What I'll do now is proceed around the members of the committee for any questions or comments or thoughts, whatever you have on this. I'll do it the same as last time. I'll start with the group spoke. So that'll be Councillor Ellis, Councillor Scordis, and then Councillor Oxford, and then I'll go through the other 5 members of the committee. You'll all get a chance to speak, and if you don't want to speak, you don't have to, just say so, but it's easy just to proceed around everyone rather than asking for hands to be raised. So Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't prolong the evening. I thought it's a sensible report. I see that we are just noting it. I've made points previously this evening regarding policy and DPD. I know there's going to be an awful lot of work for us to do on the DPD with tendering if this all goes ahead. I've already told you I've got issues with deliverability and what have you, so I'm not so sure, but hey, we will see. I'm just delighted that we're sending our policy modifications to the inspector early, and we'll get an idea of what he has to say. Our policy will inform the DPD, as in the DPD is always going to have to look up to policy, which is why I wanted all of these garden community principles hardwired into the policy at the get-go. So I'm happy with the report as is, and I'm happy to note it, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Yeah, I should note that this is just to note ongoing progress. This isn't a just official decision on anything being asked of us tonight. So, Councillor Scordis.
Yeah, similar to Councillor Ellis, very sensible report, focuses on key issues that we've all mentioned, and happy to support noting this report going forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Oxford.
Nothing to add, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order for the others this time. So, Councillor Moore. Sorry.
Happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hayter.
No, nothing to add. Quite happy, thank you.
Right. Councillor Coleman.
Nothing to add. Good piece of work. Thanks very much.
Councillor Bourne.
Oh, right. No, I've just got some queries around some of the particulars in the DPD requirements. Some of the language, I just want to tighten that up when we come to looking at it. Things like, particularly in my ward, Salary Brook, when it's referred to in different ways, Salary Brook Valley, Salary Brook, Salary Slopes. I think it would be really good to understand when we're talking about particular areas, when we get to the DPD, what actual areas we're talking about, because people can make assumptions that they're talking about the same area, and it would be dangerous to make assumptions. So I think we need to be careful about the language we use when we're talking about things that mean different things to people in that area. So if we can have a look at that, I think that would be a really good idea. It is really important to people, and I think we should be a lot clearer on what we're meaning, particularly if we're talking about green buffers.
No, it's a very good point. Thank you, Councillor Bourne. I think it is something that's worthwhile. I think as anyone can know from living in Colchester, lots of people have lots of different names for places, and it's always good to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Councillor Barber.
No, actually, I think Councillor Bourne's raised an extremely good point, and I would just like to reinforce the points she just made. I fully support that.
Thank you, councillors. I don't think there are any points that Laura needed to respond to from there. There weren't any direct questions. And I'm sure she's noted down those comments we just made there on place names. So I'll go to Richard to ask. This is again just to note the progress on this.
That's right, Chairman.
So I'll go to Richard for the vote.
Yep. So we're just voting to note this report, councillors. So Councillor Barber.
Duly noted.
That's 4. Councillor Barlow.
4.
Councillor Vaughan.
4.
Councillor Coleman.
4.
Councillor Ellis.
4.
Councillor Hayter.
4.
Councillor Moore.
4.
Councillor Oxford.
4.
And Councillor Scordis.
4.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Richard. So that's now approved. That closes item 10. And the final item is item 11, which is on the update to the Statement of Community Involvement, Coronavirus update, and Karen Syrett to present this one to us, please.
Thank you, Chair. The final report tonight concerns the Statement of Community Involvement, or as it's known, the SCI. This sets out how we consult people, both in terms of planning applications and also planning policy documents, whether that be neighbourhood plans or the local plan itself. COVID-19 has had a big impact on how we've delivered planning services for the borough, but we have endeavoured to carry on and deliver an efficient service throughout, and it has meant changing some of our practices and procedures. There's been changes necessary, for example, to the planning committee. We had an extended scheme of delegation prior to the setup of virtual meetings, and we've now reduced that delegation a bit. We also had to pull a consultation on the Tiptree neighbourhood plan, which had consequences, but we had no choice when hard copies weren't available locally. National policy and regulations have changed in the interim, so what this report sets out is updates to the SCI to reflect that national change, but to put it in a local context. It will set out what we will do, and hopefully we've covered all eventualities. So we were aware libraries were reopening when we wrote this report, but we've also included provision in there in case there is another lockdown at some time in the future. So I think that's all I was intending to say today, but happy to answer any questions on the report.
Thank you very much, Karen. And I think I'd just like to say, I haven't got any questions, I'd just like to say at the start, thanks for you and the planning team for all the work they did in making these adaptations very quickly at the start, especially I think, not necessarily for this committee, but I think for the planning committee and the planning process generally was, you know, there was a lot of things had to be done quite quickly to get things in place there, and I think it was done very well. Again, I'll go through group spokes and then the members, if anyone has any questions or comments, and then we'll go to the vote on this. So, Councillor Ellis.
Again, Chairman, it's a good report, very sensible, and I'll pay tribute to Karen and her team as well. I think they've done an incredible job, really, given the situation that they've been facing, and I think these are very sensible changes. So I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Scordis.
Yeah, all makes sense. Has my support.
Thank you. Councillor Oxford.
Yeah, makes sense. Support it. Yeah.
And back to alphabetical order then. Councillor Barber.
No, I don't have a question, thanks.
Councillor Bourne?
No questions from me, just a big thank you to the officers who put all these reports together. You make it look so easy, but it is hours and hours of work, and then you have to put up with some of our comments. So thank you very much, and yes, I agree with the SCI.
Councillor Coleman?
No, echo my thanks. Fast moving, forever changing times that we're in, and well done to everyone.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter?
No, all good. Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you.
And Councillor Moore?
Yes, thank you. Fine with the report. If I might take this opportunity to make a comment about the way the planning committee operates under the circumstances. I think there's a particular case, the Dawes Lane application. It didn't come across to the public well. Being on YouTube, it's very easy to snap a picture of all the councillors looking either asleep or drunk, and then put it out in the media. It doesn't give a good impression of how we conduct our business. And I would hope that things can get back to normal face-to-face meetings as soon as possible, because there is a general feeling that the public are not being served well on major planning applications when they are heard. And I would hope that this is taken on board. And instead of, I noticed somewhere in one of the bits of paper, digital by default. It's not a good route to go down, and we need to be very, very careful of how we see our future. I mean, it's very easy just to sit here in meetings and sit at home and say, oh, that's fine, pour myself a drink, whatever it is. But in fact, it's not an ideal way to conduct a meeting. And I would hope that we are aiming to get everything back to, well, nearly everything back to the way it was, face-to-face, in-person meetings, so that we can actually smell the grease paint and get on with life as normal. So I merely make that comment because it really was very apparent on that particular planning application. The public do not feel that they have been served well. So I'd leave it at that. But otherwise, good report. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. The one comment I'd say on that is that I have found that chairing this online has been a lot trickier and a bit more attention straining and whatever than doing it sitting in the moot hall or the grand jury room. But we are where we are. So I don't think there are any questions there. Councillor Barber.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just I omitted my gratitude to officers for the work they've done this evening, and that was very rude of me. So apologies, and just to express my gratitude and to reiterate that any points that I have made this evening are at elected members, not the officers, because ultimately elected members are responsible. We set the framework for any work the officers do. So just to express my gratitude for the work they've put in the committee this evening. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Duly noted. So there weren't any questions that need to be responded to on that, so we can move to the vote on this one, which is items 2.1 and 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Agree the revisions, publish the updated statement of community involvement, and to delegate to the lead officer for planning, housing and economic growth authority to make changes to the SCI if circumstances change to allow plan making and decision making to continue. So yeah, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Barber.
4 is what I meant to say. 4.
Councillor Barlow.
4.
Councillor Bourne.
4.
Councillor Coleman.
4.
Councillor Ellis.
4.
Councillor Hayter.
4.
Councillor Moore.
4.
Councillor Oxford.
4.
And Councillor Scordis.
4.
Thank you, Chairman. That's unanimous.
You're muted, Councillor Barlow.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not getting the bar coming up at the bottom of the screen, so I couldn't. Sorry, things have gone a bit weird on my screen. Anyway, so thank you very much, everyone, for that. That's all the items for this meeting concluded. So the meeting is now closed, and thank you for your time. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Nick, and well done.